That's honestly true, though.
Like that? You gotta be confident.
Oh, yeah.
Would you buy a car with this size?
All right. How's everyone doing today? Excellent? Most excellent? What's it to you? I am. It's a study. I'm studying you guys' class response when I record. So I'm recording because none of this stuff is in lecture slides, okay? None of it's in the book. So I'm recording so that you guys have a resource to go back and look through, okay? We're going to go through some stuff, and this way you can at least go back and play through it and kind of look at stuff more slowly, okay? So don't feel like you got to frantically do all this stuff. I kind of want you to take it in. You can write code if you want and click along with me. But I am going to try and upload this as long as it goes well. So I may fail at doing this. I've not really done it a whole lot. So I'm going to give it a try. I did it on actually last Wednesday, and I haven't shared the link with you guys, but I do have it. So anyway, so today we are going to jump into WindowBuilder. Okay, so we started off by essentially doing basically GUIs, but with code, right? And just kind of extending the JFrame and then adding some methods and stuff like that and setting the size. So today we're going to say, you know what, no one really does that anymore, maybe just for very, very simple type of stuff. But if we're doing something more complex with a more complicated layout, it's much, much easier to use a GUI designer and a GUI builder, okay? So that's what we're going to do today. I have put onto Sakai, okay, if I go into the resources under 225, you'll notice there is GUI building tips. Okay, so I recommend, I just updated this like a few seconds ago, so if you happen to already find this and download it, go ahead and grab the new one. So if you download this, it basically has some tips in there for how to do some basic stuff. Okay, this is by no means a comprehensive guide, but it does give you some nice tips. I basically went and made a GUI the other day kind of on my own, and this is all the stuff that kind of came out of my head to get things started, okay? So we're going to go through a lot of this stuff over the course of today and Friday. But this is just some really nice stuff that I've had to look up in the past, so you have it now, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is open up Eclipse if you have it, okay? So just open it up, and I want you to look for this button right here, okay? See in the top left I have it says create new visual classes. Okay? Look for that and see if it's there. Some of you guys may have it, some of you may not. Does anyone see that they do not have that button?
You don't have it.
Okay. So one person doesn't have it. Anyone else? Not to point you out, Justin. Everyone else has probably got the purple loading screen right now.
Yes, actually.
Because Eclipse is a little slow. What?
So is this thing I downloaded it already? So
You already downloaded it?
do that?
Okay. So here's the deal. This button and this functionality wasn't included in prior versions of Eclipse. The newest version of Eclipse actually has it installed by default. Okay. So for instance, I'm going to close this. Okay. So here I have in my Eclipse folder, I have basically the two latest versions, so Eclipse Luna. You'll notice that if I open, this is just a fresh download. If I open Eclipse Luna, I am going to see, I have my workspace L for workspace Luna. Okay, there we go. All right, you'll see that the button exists. Okay, so this functionality is included in Luna. At least on Windows. I don't actually know if it is on Mac or Linux or anything like that. So now if I actually go, you'll notice if I go into Kepler, so this is the next to last version, some of you guys may have, older version. Does anyone have this version? Does that look familiar? Okay, so workspace K for Kepler. Okay, like I said, this may be true on Macs, may not have this by default as well, but what you'll notice is I don't actually have that same button. Okay, I have the new for Java project, but I don't have this guy which lets me do swing stuff, right? Okay, so we can add this just in case you don't have it, and this is a good thing to basically kind of have a clue about. So with Eclipse, Eclipse is a really powerful editor, and I can actually add add-ons and plugins. Okay, so what happens is a lot of times other people will write, basically WindowBuilder was written, I think, by a third party, and as an add-on to Eclipse. And so many people used it, which is why I'm guessing that's now included in Windows. Or not Windows, but Eclipse. Okay? So if I do want to add it, again, this is my Kepler version. I have the instructions in Dr. Dan's GUI tips. Okay, so to use WindowBuilder, Luna already includes it. Otherwise, I basically need to download it. Okay, and the way that I do this is I gave you the link right here for WindowBuilder. So just click on that. Open it up, and you're going to notice that it's going to bring you to this update site. Okay, so what I want to do is essentially I want to find the version that I have, so I know particularly I'm working with Kepler. Okay, if I don't know, I can go probably and click Help About Eclipse, and then it will tell me right there, Kepler. Okay, so what I want to do is, if you notice, I just want to go and download, or actually let me click on this. I think if I click the link there, it actually gives me instructions. Okay, it's pretty simple. What I need to do is say help install new software. Okay, so I'll kind of do this in unison. So click help, install new software. All right, and then going back. Next step says drag the URL from this update site and drop it into the work with field. Okay, so actually copy this particular address. So I'm going to copy that, and then I need to paste it in the work with field of the install dialog. Okay, so coming back to Kepler, this is really good to know. Even if you already have WindowBuilder installed, you might need to do this for another package. Okay, so I just simply paste it, and what should happen is this should update. Sometimes it doesn't. It's a little finicky. There, if I hit enter, you'll notice that it actually kind of updated this stuff. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I know how to finish, but let's just kind of go through, right? So basically what I want to do is check all the features to be installed and click install. All right, so I'm just going to check everything, especially the swing. Click next. Next. Got to accept the terms. Click finish. It's going to install it. I have run into issues with my firewall before. Sometimes it just basically won't install, so you may need to consider disabling your firewall if you have Windows Firewall or AVG or Zone Alarm or whatever it is. You may need to disable that to be able to connect to this update site. So it's doing its thing. I'll wait just a second. While we're waiting, a few things that the GUI tips are going to tell you is, one, how do I set what's called the look and feel of my program? Okay, so what this does is by default, when I create a Java program using WindowBuilder, it looks just like Java. It kind of looks a little weird and a little not nice, so to say. I can basically make it so it's either going to look like the operating system. So it would look like the operating system I'm running on. Okay, so if I have a file, I can run it on Mac, and it's going to look like your Mac operating system. I can run it on Windows, and it's going to look like the Windows operating system. So this is what's called the look and feel. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about how to actually create a new GUI application. A little bit about how to model this in a clean way. How to set up your packages. The group layout. We'll talk a little bit about panels. Variable names. We kind of talked about this already, but just so you kind of have an official reference of kind of get you started for that. We'll talk about exporting our program to a jar file, and there are a lot of resources for components and layouts. If you just click on these links, it will take you straight to Okay, good. So we're done now. So you will need to restart Eclipse. Okay, so notice there's no button up here. Now I restart Eclipse, and we shall find, hopefully, a different scenario. Okay, so now you see that I do have the button. I actually have a lot more stuff because I downloaded all the packages, okay? But really all I really need is the swing one, okay? This is kind of just some extra stuff. I would encourage you to just use swing, okay? All right, so I'm going to close this. Now that you see kind of how we install it, I'm going to just open up my normal Eclipse, which is right here. All right, so I'm going to start off and just make a new project. Okay, so new Java project. So we create a project like normal. I'll just call it WindowBuilder. Okay. I hope so. All right, so WindowBuilder, and then I'll click Finish. Okay, so I now have my WindowBuilder project. Okay, and then I want to add some kind of source. Okay. Before I even get started, I want to kind of set you up on the right foot. Okay, so what I normally do is when I start to use GUIs, I actually start to use packages. Okay, so I typically like to have at least 3 packages. You'll notice I kind of have this in the tips here. If we look at number 6, so I recommend having a views package, which is going to basically contain all your particular GUI windows. A common package, which is going to contain maybe your classes that aren't really GUI related, but I still need them to run my program. Okay, so maybe you have a hotel class, maybe you have a reservation class. And then a resources package. Okay, the resources package is just going to contain any images we have. Okay, so icons, images, anything that we want to incorporate visually into our GUI, I'm going to put into the resources package. Okay. So if I go ahead and look at my kind of backend, right? If I come in, I'm going to find, if I go into 225 WindowBuilder, if I go into my source, I just have an empty folder, okay? Because at this point, I'm using the default package, and everything's going to just go into the source folder. So what I want to do now is I'm going to create some packages, okay? So I just right-click and I say New Package, okay? I'm going to call this one Views. Just hit Finish, okay? And usually it's a good idea to actually give the package a name based off the project, okay? So sometimes I do, so I'll delete this. Sometimes I do this. I'll say New Package, and then I'll say WindowBuilder dot Views, okay? So that's very clear what views these are, because I could have multiple GUI projects. And then I'm going to go and say New Package again, and I'll call this one WindowBuilder.Common. Okay, and these are just kind of my conventions. You can give them different names that make sense to you, but I think they're pretty good. So we'll do another package, and I'll say WindowBuilder dot resources. Okay, so what you'll find is I now have these 3 empty packages. If I come back to my source folder, you'll see it now has a WindowBuilder folder in there, and if I open that, I'm going to have Common, Resources, and Views. Okay, so this is now where my code is going to end up. Okay, so if I click on Common, you'll see there's nothing in there. Resources, nothing in there. Views, there's nothing in there at this point. But let's create a view. Okay, so let's create our first kind of GUI using WindowBuilder. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially, I'm going to click on Views down here. And this is important, right? So I want to click on the package I want to add it to, so Views, and then click up here, okay? And just say Swing JFrame, okay? So remember, when we were just creating a GUI from scratch, we would just create a normal class, and then we would say extends JFrame, right? So here I'm just saying, hey, I want this class to extend the JFrame. So let's give it a name. We'll call it first window builder GUI or something like that. Okay, so first window builder GUI. All right, so finish. Okay, so let me make this a little smaller. All right, so here is what I get by default. Okay, so already you can kind of tell it's doing some somewhat kind of ugly stuff, but it's going to work. Okay, so you can see we're creating our, we're doing a creation of our object, right? So we're instantiating an object, and we're calling it frame, and then I'm saying frame.setVisible. Okay, so this is the absolute minimum I need to do to basically cause my GUI to run. So if I hit run now, you'll see I get my GUI. Okay, so it's just an empty GUI with a generic icon, but we do have the minimize, maximize, close, and we can resize it. Okay, so so it does have a little bit of extra stuff down here. All right, so typically the first thing I like to do, so let me show you a few things. You'll notice because I created this class using the window builder JFrame up here, I kind of click swing and then JFrame. You'll notice that I have this special tab at the bottom, right? So I can now click on my design tab, and it's going to basically, what it does is it parses through this code and it gives me this design tab. Okay, so now I can see basically what my window looks like, and I can see all these different types of components I can put out there. Here's all my components down here, right? You can see JLabel, buttons. I can see all the different layouts I have to choose from. So I can have forms, groups, group layout, grid layout, grid bag layout. So there's a bunch of different options. Up here there's a few types of containers. Panel is one we'll use a lot. Scroll pane, the tab pane you might like to use. Okay. So we'll kind of play around, and I'll kind of let you guys play. The best way to learn is just to toss something out there and just kind of start messing with it, right? Try and start putting stuff in it, and then play it, right, and see what happens. So I can do something like, hey, let me put a radio button out there, right, and then play it, and there's my radio button, right? So kind of not that great, right, because it doesn't do anything yet, but at least I can get a radio button out there real quickly, okay? If I want to remove it, should be able to click on it. I guess I am clicked on it. Kind of just tosses it out there. So once I click on it, you'll see it kind of highlights it over here. On the left, I have kind of like a hierarchy. Basically shows you, hey, I have this JFrame. Inside the JFrame is a content pane. This is my container. Inside my container, I have this radio button called new radio button. Okay, so if I want to delete it, I can just click on it over here. Click delete. It's going to get rid of it. You'll see it disappeared from my kind of hierarchy structure over here. Okay. All right, so before I get too far started, I want to kind of clean up my code a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to notice is I'm basically going to do a few simple things, like put a few components out there, and it's going to create this whole big nasty thing of code that is going to look kind of ugly. Okay, so it really helps to up front, let me clean up my code before I really do anything to kind of get things off on the right foot. Okay, so if you remember from what we did when we were creating a GUI from scratch, I said to do this. Create two methods to go into the constructor. Okay, so one's going to be initializing the components, and one's going to be creating events. So we want to do that same thing. Okay, so one kind of disclaimer though is when I do something in a designer, it's going to change my code in the back end. Okay, and likewise, if I change the code in my back end, it's going to change the designer as well. Okay, it's going to change what I see on my design tab down here. Okay, if I have an error in my code, let's say I start writing some code and I have an error, you may not be able to click on this design tab. Okay, because it basically reads through this design tab, and from your code it will kind of draw this GUI for me. So keep that in mind. You're going to need to get rid of any errors you have before this might work, and let's try this real quick. But what I want to show you is, let me go ahead and add that radio button back out there. Okay, so if I look at my source, you're going to see I don't have any radio button anywhere on here. Okay, if I click on my radio button and just kind of add one back out there, okay, there's my radio button. Now when I click on source, you'll see, hey, look, I have a radio button that was added in there automatically. Okay, so when you click on stuff in your design, right, when I'm clicking around on the GUI designer, it's actually changing the code behind the scenes. Okay, and I can kind of go back and forth. Sometimes it's going to be easier for you to be writing direct code, and sometimes it's going to be easy for you to be actually clicking around on my designer, right? So I can actually click this and say, hey, you know what, I actually want it over here, and then my code is actually going to change behind the scenes. Okay, so just remember, the designer is just a helper. The code is kind of what everything is really running off, but the designer can help you write the code. Okay, so at this point, I don't actually want this radio button out here, so I'm going to delete it. So I just hit delete on my keyboard, and you'll see that my radio button is now gone from my GUI code. Okay, so going off the tip, I said let's have an initComponents and a createEvents. Okay, so I'm just going to create these two methods, and they're going to be in my GUI, or in my constructor rather. Okay, so I'm going to say, all right, initComponents, and then createEvents. Okay, so I'll just create those, and obviously they don't exist yet, so I'll just hover over and say, all right, create method, and then create method. Okay, so now I have these two methods. Okay, and I'm just gonna basically put some comment bars out there that kind of separate it from everything else to help me clean my code up a little. Okay, so I'm just gonna say this method contains all of the code for creating events, and then this method contains all the code for creating and initializing components. Okay, so I'm going to move this up above actually, because I'm going to be working with it a little bit more. All right, so if you remember, when I was over in the designer tab, okay, I was over in this designer tab and I was adding buttons, and it was automatically adding code to my backend. Okay, so it basically kind of finds what you've already added and it kind of just adds it right afterwards, right, or kind of in the midst of this. So we kind of got to teach it a little bit that, hey, instead of adding it to my constructor like it's doing by default, I want to add it to these initial components, and it might take a little bit of massaging to get it to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, all right, let me go ahead and close this, or I'm going to cut all this stuff. I'm going to paste it into my initComponents. Okay, so now I have all this stuff in my initComponents. All right, now I'm going to go back to my design tab, and I'm going to just try this again and see if it works. Okay, I'm going to add a radio button out there, and hopefully this radio button was added to my new initComponents tab. Okay, so if we go to our source, we'll see that in fact it was. Okay, so it's basically, it's not just adding it to the constructor, it's adding it to kind of where it sees all my components are being initialized. Okay, so this is really nice. Once we make this change, it's going to automatically add it to kind of the right place. All right. Events we'll get into later, so we'll just kind of keep this here for now. Okay. All right. So now that we've done this, we can kind of keep this. This is a little bit messy up here, right? But I like doing this. You guys may not like doing this, but I think it helps to visualize a little bit cleaner. All right, so I've got my constructor, and I've got my my initComponents and my createEvents. Okay. All right, so the first thing I really want to do, okay, and there is in my GUI builder, let's go ahead and let's change the title and the icon. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is notice that when I play this, all right, it kind of gives me this window. And let me put a button out there so we can kind of look. The button will kind of show us a lot about what our look and feel is, and then we'll mess around with that a little bit. So let me just put a button out here. Okay, there's my button. I don't like that, so let me put it over here. So you see how I dragged it out there? So let me do that again, okay? So once I created a button, I put it out there somewhere, and I said I didn't like that. I can actually move it by dragging it around. So you can see it by default. It's using what's called the if I click on my container, you'll see the layout. It's using a border layout. Okay. If you look over here, this looks kind of like it, right? It's got kind of these 4 regions that I can place stuff in. I'm going to change that in a little bit. But for now, when I hit play, you'll see my button right here. Not sure in the border layout. I think it just takes the full thing. So let me move it up here. Okay. So there's my button. It looks a little bit not like Windows, right? I don't know. Does that look like a Windows button to you? Kind of not. Okay. So we'll change that in just a second. But what I want to show you is, the first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and add a title to our GUI, okay? And let's go ahead and also change the icon, okay? So this is really easy in WindowBuilder. Does anyone remember how we actually did this using just code? We did set title on the what? On the constructor. It was basically on the JFrame, right? So it's a similar concept, right? So if I click up here, I can kind of click stuff, and you'll notice that as I click the button gets highlighted over here in my kind of hierarchical structure. If I click on the radio button gets highlighted. If I click up here, it'll highlight the frame, and then if I kind of get lucky and just happen to click right on the side there, it'll highlight the content pane. Okay. So if I basically click on the frame, or I can click on it up here, you'll notice that it has all of this stuff over here is what's called the properties. Okay. So by default, it kind of gives you some very common properties to mess with. Okay. So you'll notice enabled, font, foreground, icon image. There's a title down here. And the black ones, you see how it bolds them? Those are even like, I'm assuming it bolds it because it's even like the more popular options. Okay. So here's where I could basically say something, hey, if I want to change the foreground is the text, right? So let me actually change the background. And I wouldn't recommend doing this, right? But this is, if I do red, see if it actually changes it. Okay. I think that what happens is this frame is behind. Yeah, it's behind the content pane. So if I click on the content pane and then change the background, there you see that we're getting a red background. Okay, so again, I wouldn't do that. I'm going to hit Control-Z because it's kind of ugly. All right, so let me now click on my frame again, and I can simply come down here and say, title, my awesome GUI. Okay, just hit Enter or something, and you'll notice it pops up there right away. Okay, so if I hit play, I now have a title on my frame. Okay, if you look at the source code, you'll notice, hey, I typed in my awesome GUI. If you want to say, hey, where was that done? Well, you can basically search for my awesome GUI. I don't actually like that it was right there. So you see, sometimes it will kind of place it not where you want it to go. So I'm going to actually just kind of move it to keep things a little bit nice and clean. All right, you'll see it's still going to work. My awesome GUI. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and change the icon. Okay, so this is something I want you to pay close attention to. Okay, we're going to basically add what's called a resource, and it's going to add it into something called our class path. Okay, so the idea is when I'm done with my whole project, I just want to have one file that has all my images and my resources in it. Right? I don't want it to be reading from my folder system at all. That way, I can just give you my jar file, for instance, and that's all you need to run the program. Okay, so the first thing I need is I actually need an icon. Okay, so you'll notice if I click on icon image, it gives me some options. It says no image, absolute path. So this is where it would just refer to the file system, or it gives me class path. And this is what I really want to be doing. This is why we created that. This is why we created the resources package. So you'll notice if I click over here, it'll show me that was weird. For some reason it's not showing up with my class. Okay, so let me just try and add it and let's see what happens. All right, so what I want to do is I want to actually go out and download an icon. Okay, so icons are usually square, right? So you want something that has a square resolution, 32 by 32, 16 by 16 pixels. And I want something that for sure I have the rights to use. Okay, so what I often do is I say free icons. Pretty simple, right? So if you just Google free icons, you maybe do one of these, right? Free icons, icon finder. And a lot of these websites will basically allow you to use their icons for free, for whatever purpose. So I'll do this one. One that I can actually search. Okay, so find icons. So what's my GUI doing? It's awesome, right? My awesome GUI. So I need an awesome icon.
Do you got any monkeys?
Monkey? I'll do monkey for you, Montro. Monkey. That one's good right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll grab a PNG. Oh, I just downloaded it. If I clicked on it, I'm going to click on the actual thing. And you'll notice a lot of these will have like the different sizes, okay? So I can get, this is a 128 by 128, which is plenty big, right? So I downloaded that. Here it is, okay? My monkey. So typically what I want to do is I want to see how big it is, okay? And I want to name it accordingly. So I'm going to say properties, and you'll notice that we have, if I click on in Windows like details, so I can see it's 128 by 128, okay? It's actually quite a bit bigger than I really want for my icon, but it will automatically resize it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it, okay? So I'm just going to name it something like this, monkey, and then 128, okay? So this basically tells me, just so I can kind of know easily how big is my monkey icon, okay? All right, so kind of coming back into our Windows kind of file system view or whatever if you're using Mac, right? So if you remember, we had our source folder, we had our window builder. Now if I click on views, you'll see that it created Java, the Java file. Click on resources. So I want to be inside the resources directory, and I'm just going to drag my monkey over there. Okay, so monkey 128 is now in there. All right, I'll minimize this and I'll go back into Java here. Okay, so let me go to my source code view. Just kind of make this not full screen. All right, so I basically want to get over here so I can see the package explorer. Okay, so you'll notice that I only have something in my Windows WindowBuilder.views. You can see it's kind of brown, which means, hey, there's actually stuff in this package. And these other two are kind of empty, right? That basically means, hey, there's actually nothing in these packages. Now that I've actually changed the, let me get rid of some of these folders. Okay, now that I've actually changed this folder, I've added something in it, I can come back in here and I can right-click on my resources folder and click refresh. You'll notice that now it gave me this little drop down, okay, and it has something in there. It doesn't have code in there, so it doesn't really turn it brown, but it does have something in there. So you can see it did change the icon. It kind of gave me, I don't know what that is, a like really, really tiny folder, I think it is. All right, so now hopefully at this point, we can go back into our designer. Okay, so once I didn't actually detail this, so let's hope it works this time. So I'm going to click on my frame again, and now on icon image, class path resources. Okay, good. So you see now that I actually have some kind of image resource in my project in one of my packages, it now gives me a source option. Okay, before this source wasn't there, if you remember, it was just this resources. So now I can click, make sure I do class path resource, and then I expand this, and you'll basically go into your resources package, and it's going to give you all the images that you essentially that you put into that folder and that you refreshed. Okay, so now I click OK, and you'll see I have a monkey. Just hit play. So now I have my awesome GUI, and I have a monkey in there. Okay, this icon, probably it's closer to 16 by 16. So if you find an icon that's 16 by 16, it's probably going to look better than the 128 by 128 shrunk, just because it just will. Okay, so so far we have set the icon image, okay, and we have set the title, okay. So what you'll notice is these properties are pretty common for a lot of components, right? So I just said the icon image and the title. I can go over to my button, okay, and I can do the same thing, right? I can click on text, and I can say the monkey button, right? And you'll notice that right away it changes the button over here to the monkey button. And I have an icon, right? Before it was image icon, but it's icon now. I can click on this, and I can say the same thing, right? Go in class path, let me select monkey. And now I have a ridiculously large monkey on my button, okay? So I have the monkey button, and I have new radio button, okay? And this basically is going to fill out the button as big as you've allowed the button to be. This particular layout allows me to, it just fills the button into that gigantic space. I wouldn't recommend making buttons this big. All right. So let's kind of go back to our source and look at what's happened, okay? So you'll notice it's done a few things that I really didn't want it to do. It seems like on the frame it's always adding the code. When I'm changing the frame, it's adding it into the constructor still, but everything else it's adding into my initComponents. So let me go ahead and I'll copy this down too as well to my awesome GUI WindowBuilder. Okay. So it's making some code. I don't quite understand it maybe, right? Toolkit.getDefault, but who cares, right? It works. So you can look at this and kind of obviously you could figure out, hey, if I added another image, I could basically change the name here as long as I imported it and refresh my folder over there. But it's doing some stuff. Okay, so let's see what we've done so far, if we missed anything. Okay, so let's talk about look and feel now. Okay, when I hit play, it kind of looks a little bit, you may not be able to tell, but this is actually, I think, a Java kind of look and feel. So if I want my GUI to look like whatever operating system I'm running it on, there's a simple button that I need to click, or it's a simple setting. It has to do with what's called the look and feel of your GUI. Okay. So for instance, what's the difference between like a Java window or a window in Mac OS and a window in Windows? Borders, transparency. What about the very top?
Different circles.
Right. So on Windows, the minimize, maximize, close box is on the right side, right? On Mac, it's on the wrong side, right? Did you catch that? It's on the left side, right? On Mac, the buttons are over here, and they're like little circles instead, and the buttons just kind of have a slightly different feel and all that, okay? So what I need to do to basically say, hey, no matter, I'm going to create one jar file, and no matter if you run my jar file on Windows or on Mac or even on Linux, it's going to look like that operating system, okay? So what I do, so watch this, I say Windows, and I click on Preferences, and I go down to my WindowBuilder tab, okay? So I have a WindowBuilder tab, just kind of expand it, and I click on Swing, okay? I expand Swing, there's a Look and Feel tab, okay? So I actually already have it checked by default. You may or may not. So what I'm going to do is, let's say you don't have that checked. When I play it, I think it has a setting already in there. So make sure, just make sure that it is checked, okay? This is the first time I've actually seen it checked. I think it's because I already have been messing with these settings on my personal computer. So it's set in there. But notice once that option is set, I can now click on this and I can click on something different, right? So I think by default it's like it's not going to look like Windows. It's going to look like metal, I think it is. Okay, so I'm going to hit play. It's hard to tell on this. It actually looks pretty similar. Maybe Nimbus. What's that? Yeah, so you don't have to. So see, you can see this one's a little bit different, right? Nimbus. And it's changing it, right? So I have, there's another one, right? So basically it's going to look like this, no matter if I'm running it on Mac OS or on Windows or Linux. It just kind of has a different feel. So typically what you want to do is, see Windows Classic. It's my old school buttons, okay? So basically what you want to do is just make sure it's on system, okay? And this will basically pull from your current system, and it's going to make it, the buttons look like Windows buttons in my instance or Mac buttons in your instance, okay? Okay, so that is system look and feel. Again, this is all in the tips guide. New GUI, we've done that. Components, haven't done that. We'll get to that in just a second. 3 packages, group layout, panels, variable names. Okay, so we're ready to kind of just start messing around and trying to make a real GUI at this point. Okay, not that, you know, the monkey button doesn't consist of a real GUI, but it doesn't. So I didn't hear what you said. All right, so when I click, notice, so when I click on a different component or a different button, notice that this panel, this properties panel, is changing as well, right? So it's giving me properties for this particular button that's selected, or maybe this particular container, this particular frame. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just delete these buttons real quick. Just kind of give us a clean slate. Okay, so if I go into source, you'll notice nothing's there. What happens if I remember when I said if I have an error in my source? I'm going to click design. It may still work. Okay, it may still work. Sometimes it won't though. Okay, sometimes it will come up and it'll say, hey, parsing error. I've even seen if I have like an error in my code, or maybe I'm not doing something right, and then I fix it and I go to design, and it still won't work. Okay, so just know that this is like a third-party type of plugin. It's part of Eclipse now, but it can be a little finicky sometimes. So sometimes you might just have to try it a few times, right? I might say design source, design source. You gotta really mess something up, right? Let's see if it does it now. That's pretty good, right? So I will prove my point to you. There we go. Okay. So now it's saying, right, some kind of nasty error. WindowBuilder was not able to show the GUI. Please read the description below. So WindowBuilder encountered unexpected internal error. This could be caused by a WindowBuilder bug or by a misconfiguration issue, conflict, partial update. Basically means I have bad code. Although they're being very nice and blaming themselves, they're really saying, hey, this is your fault. But they're not saying that directly. Okay. You'll see it'll basically have this stuff, reparse. Basically means, hey, try again, right? Like maybe if I click this a few times, it will work. Maybe, and I'm actually being serious. It might actually work if I click it a few times. I had to do this the other night, and I kind of went back and forth between source and GUI, and sometimes you have to go and like change like that, you know, save it, and then add it back to kind of get it to refresh. You go to design, reparse. It also has this go-to problem, which is probably what you want to do, right? So JLabel is actually not a Java class. Okay, so it's actually pretty smart, right? It knows I really meant JLabel. So I'm going to go ahead, change it back to JLabel, and then should be called label, new label. Okay, so now I've got rid of all my errors. I can click design, and you'll see that it works again. So beautiful. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that. So here's my source. Okay, I don't really want to see this main, so I'm going to minimize it. Okay, sometimes it's nice to just minimize all the clutter, especially when you start working with GUIs, because it's going to create a lot of code that is going to get really obnoxious to look at. So notice that you can do this in Eclipse. I can say, hey, you know what? I don't want to look in this for a while. Let me minimize it, right? So I'm just going to keep open just the stuff I want. I do need to fix this, right? It was set content pane. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and now mess around with layouts a little bit. Okay, so if I click on my content pane over here, okay, you'll notice this is the variable name. I'm actually going to change this. I want to show you that I can do this. Okay, so here, notice content pane right here. If I go into my source, you'll notice content pane as well. Okay, so maybe I want to name this to like CP or something like that. CTP content pane. Okay, and then main content, right? Whatever it is, I'm just going to basically kind of get off of there. You'll notice it changes it up here, but it also changed it in my source as well. I see content pane main content. Okay, or maybe I just call it content pane. I like main a little bit because that's kind of a little bit repetitive to say content pane main content, right? So there we go, content pane main. All right, so but notice when I click on my content pane, it gives me a layout, and it gives me this border layout. Okay, if I click up on the frame, it doesn't actually have a layout. So it's the, remember, it's the content pane that is, content pane is technically it's a component. Okay, so it has what's called this layout, and I can change this. Okay, I can either click on here and just select a new one. What I typically like to do is just click up here. Okay, so notice this. Group layout is the one that we want to be using. Okay, so click group layout, and then notice I can drag it over here, and it's going to turn green what I'm trying to put it into. Okay, so if I just click there, you'll notice that, hey, now my content pane is of a group layout. Okay, so watch how this is different. Now I'm going to put a button out there, and notice how it's not filling up like a big chunk. It's basically letting me put it wherever I want. But notice what it's doing. It's giving me all these extra little like lines to kind of show how it's basically grouping it to the sides of my GUI. Okay, so what this shows me is, let me just play it, and I'll kind of just show you by demonstration. Okay, if I resize this, it's not going anywhere. Okay, I can actually do auto resizable. Okay, so now basically it's being resized up and down based on anchored to the top of this content pane and the bottom. So let's see what happens. So it's now going to grow a little. Okay, so basically what it's saying is, hey, keep this much room in between the bottom of the button and the bottom of the screen, right? And keep this much room from the top of the button to the top of the screen. Okay, I can do the same thing with the right and the left, right? So it's basically going to keep that much room on the left and that much room on the right. So it's kind of grouping it, so you notice it'll kind of resize it. If you go smaller, all bets are off, right? It'll kind of eventually cover it up. But as long as you have at least your default size, it's going to resize it. Okay, I would highly recommend not doing this for buttons. Okay, you never. It's just good. It's just you don't see it, right? We never see a button resizing. It's the other components that I see resizing. Okay, so let me go ahead. I'll get rid of this button just for a second. Okay, so typically what I want to do is I want to have maybe something like a form. Okay, so I want to have a label and then a text field, a label and then a text field, a label and then a text field. Okay, so I might do something like this. I'm going to go and grab a label. Okay, and I'm just going to drag it out there. See how it kind of gives me some kind of guidelines there. So I'm going to kind of do it so it just gives me a little bit of space up in this corner, so I'm not too close to the edge. Okay, and I'm going to put in something like this: first name with a colon. Okay, so now when I play it, I just have first name. Okay, and then I'm going to go and put a JTextField. Okay, so I'm going to put my JTextField. You'll see it kind of gives me some standard options for how close I want it to be. It's kind of up to you, right? Do you want it to be super, obviously saying, hey, don't put it any closer than this, because then it's going to be kind of overflowing onto the label. Do I want it to be pretty close, not so close, or have some breathing room, right? So it just depends on where I want to snap it to. I like to do it either 1 or 2. Okay, so now I have this label in here. So again, if I go ahead and play this, have my label, right? So something I might want to do is say, all right, let me actually kind of stretch this. I can stretch it and kind of get it close to the side, right? So I'm going to give it some space. So I'm going to snap it right there. And you'll notice it'll actually kind of change these a little bit, okay? So what's happening here is I'm saying, hey, this text field that I just created, I want it to be locked to whatever's above it. Okay? And then I want it to resize left and right. Okay? And I'm going to basically keep this much space to the border, and then you can't really see it, but on the left as well. Okay? So now when I create this, you'll notice that as I resize my window, my text box also resizes. Okay? So this is a really nice feature because I'm basically resizing very gracefully. Okay? The text box doesn't really matter how big it is. I'm resizing it. Okay? So I might do this a few times. Now let me take a second to look at naming conventions. Okay? So this one's actually pretty good, right? So you'll notice that it actually gave me LBL first name. This is exactly what I would call it. Okay? Over here, however, it just says text field. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, now again, if I go to my source, you'll see see how nasty it's getting already. I've just added 2 things out there. It's going to get worse the more stuff we add. Okay? So the nice thing is we don't really have to look at it too much. Here's my text field. What I want you to notice is, okay, in this instance, I actually created it as an instance variable. Okay? This is actually what we want it to do. It doesn't always do this, though. Okay? Notice it didn't do that for the label. Why do you think it might not do that for the label?
The label shouldn't change.
Yeah, the label's probably not going to change, so we don't actually want it to be an instance variable. But we may actually change it, right? In our first calculator GUI that we did, we were actually changing labels programmatically, right? So let's say that was the case. Let's say we did something like this. Okay, so I'm going to say, all right, label first name. You'll notice that label first name, where is it defined? I can maybe even right-click on it. Let's see. Yeah, maybe not. So I'm going to go in the source, and okay, here it is. You see it's defined somewhere in my code in initComponents. Okay. So let's say that I wanted to be able to change this label later on, right? If I wanted to do that, I want to do it from my event handler, right? Well, my event handler is in some other method, so this label needs to be a public variable. Okay, so to do that within WindowBuilder, the easiest way to do it, so notice it's defined right here. Go back to your designer, click on the label either over here or actually click on it out here. There's this little button right here. Okay, so notice it says convert local to field. It's basically going to convert my local variable into an instance variable. So if I click it, you notice it changes, and now when I come over here, the JLabel is no longer defined right here. It's actually defined as an instance variable. Okay? I may want to go the opposite way. Let's say that I have something defined as an instance variable, and I say, hey, you know what? I actually don't want this to be an instance variable. It just needs to be a local variable. I go and I click on it again. I just see the button now says convert field to local, right? So it's going to now make it back into a local variable. Okay? All right, so label. Let's do one more thing just to kind of give you, we had about 30 seconds here. Let me put my button back out there. All right, so just to show an event handler really quickly, I'm going to put my button out there. I'm going to call it click me. Okay, so gives it a nice name, button click me. You'll notice that it says convert local to field, which means it's already a field, which is good. Okay, it kind of knows. All right, so let's say I want to add a handler. It's really easy. Go to the button, right click on it, add event handler. Okay, I want in particular an action handler, so if some action is performed, which is when I click on it, but you can see I can do all this other stuff for components. So add action handler. All right, it's going to by default add it right here. Okay, I actually don't want that. I'm going to just basically cut it and put it down to my event handlers. Okay, I think this is a little bit cleaner. Didn't get it all. Okay, so I'm going to put it down here, paste it. Okay, so it's going to give me a problem. It's going to say, hey, button click me is not found because it was basically a local variable. So I need to go back. I actually told you wrong earlier, right? I actually do want to say convert local to field. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of this error. So finally, right, if we notice at the top, my button is an instance variable. So I can come down here, I can reference it. This is where I'm adding my action handler. And here, this will be the last thing we do. I can just say j option pane dot show message dialog null, and then congrats. Okay, so when I run this, when I click the click me, the action event handler is in there properly. Okay, so we'll stop here for now, and then tomorrow we'll get started with the lab. Okay, we'll keep on going with this, and I'll put this online hopefully today.
Mr. Grissom,
Yes.
what's the quiz on?